Hello, everyone. Dan Kaufman, Managing Director at Sport Techie. I am pleased to welcome you to our third and final track of this Sport Techie Pro Day on reopening sports venues. This third track is on venue connectivity and communication. We will have a couple of segments on this track, but it's not the last thing that we have today. We have a closing fireside chat after this track on venue connectivity and communication, and make sure you stick around for that as well. This panel is called Safely Opening NASCAR Venues Using Spatial Intelligence. It's powered by our partners at Meshh, and I am pleased to welcome to the stage Julie Giese, President of Phoenix Raceway, Garth Hill, Account Director North America at Meshh, Caroline McGuckian, CEO at Meshh, and Craig Neeb, EVP and Chief Innovation Officer at NASCAR. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here today. We've got an interesting title for this panel, and I want to start by passing it over to our friends at Meshh to tell me, what is spatial intelligence? How do you use it? And tell me more generally about your technology. So Garth or Caroline, go ahead and start.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in on this one. Thanks so much, Dan, and your entire team for hosting. Yeah, spatial intelligence is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot in our world, but a lot of people that we come across don't necessarily, they have the same question: what is spatial intelligence? So what we try and do at Meshh is provide rights holders, venue owners, brands, entertainment promoters. Really want to give them a way to measure the way that consumers and fans interact with and explore physical spaces. So at Meshh, we do that with a sensor technology. Basically, how that works is it's a sensor, and we deploy any number of those sensors around a footprint or a brand activation or a stadium, or in this case, a track with our NASCAR friends. And what the sensors do is they're listening for Wi-Fi pings from consumers' smart devices, so their phones mainly. And what we can do is, as we listen for those pings, we start to develop a picture of how long people are engaging at a specific activation or a specific area. We can get an idea of repeat visits and a whole host of different metrics that are provided through our reporting dashboard to really help drive more informed and data-driven decision-making on the part of the stakeholders.
Very interesting. I want to ask a follow-up question to that, and that's one that I've asked a panel earlier today, and I think it's an interesting one. And the question is, pre-COVID, what was the challenge that you were trying to solve? And then, when COVID came around, did that challenge change, or really is a technology that could be easily applicable to this situation? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I think specifically as Meshh started a few years back, the missing piece for experiential specifically was, we throw all this money at these activations, and how do we know what the ROI is? So we wanted to come up with a way to be able to prove what the ROI is and prove, what the reach looked like, what the engagement looked like, what, your repeat visitors, as I mentioned earlier, things like that. I think with COVID specifically, and we'll probably touch on this a little bit later, it wasn't so much a pivot for us as a repackaging of the information that we already had, kind of putting a new face on it. The information that the system that we're using with NASCAR was already in place in terms of capacity monitoring. We just kind of brought that to the forefront, and Caroline probably can speak a little bit more to that as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Caroline.
Yeah, yes, Garth, you're right. We didn't come into approaching the COVID problem by thinking about what we needed to do. What we wanted to focus on was how we could apply the information that we already had. We were confident in the infrastructure and the system that we have in place. And when you're dealing with health and safety and operations, and when it's people's well-being, what you don't necessarily, in our opinion, want to be doing is taking any risks with that. So we focused very much on what we knew we were good at and what we have been doing for years. And we identified out of that areas that we could support our partners and areas that we could highlight that made a difference to how they interacted in the world of COVID. So we had all of the insight. We just didn't necessarily pull it out of the back end of the system in the same way because it was less interesting 12 months ago than it is today.
Yeah, certainly.
And unfortunately, less relevant.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so let's jump to our folks at NASCAR and Phoenix Raceway here. And Craig, I think I'll probably jump to you. I think it's an interesting story from NASCAR's perspective. After COVID hit, you were the first major North American sports league to open without fans, which in and of itself was a tremendous accomplishment. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. So that's probably where we'll start. And then I want you also to tell us, from there to the point where you were thinking about bringing fans back, some of the challenges along that way. And then we'll get to actually the activation with Julie at Phoenix Raceway and the race that you had and how Meshh helped that process. So Craig, take us back to leading up to the day when you actually were able to open.
Well, Dan, thanks for having us here today. And it was a journey for sure. What was ironic is that the last race that we had with fans was in Phoenix at Julie's property. And I can remember several of the executive team were meeting in the infield and saying, hey, this COVID thing looks like it's going to be real. We got to really get prepared and plan. And we actually then at that point brought on a specialist, an epidemiologist that really kind of helped guide us because we knew we were going to need that expertise as we were going to enter into this big unknown, which we had no idea what was going to hit us. And literally a week later, we were planning on the Atlanta race and we had to pull the plug on that. And that's when we had to shut down to get back to, finally in May timeframe where we got back to racing. And so during that time between the middle of March and I would say end of April, we worked around the clock. And there was only a small team of us here in Daytona Beach and a couple others from outside of Daytona, really just planning through the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? Again, there was just so many unknowns for all of us at that time. But first and foremost, we thought our sport had a little bit of a differentiation. Our drivers are in basically, they're in, PPE equipment because they got helmets and fire suits and all that. So that we certainly saw that as a strategic advantage that, we could get back probably sooner. But it takes a mountain of people to put on a NASCAR event that are industry related. You're talking, thousands of people. So who were the essential people? Who were the ones that really needed to be there, both from the team standpoint, from the official standpoint, from the broadcasters, to be able to put that all together in a secure environment and make that work so that nobody would cross-contaminate, would compartmentalize. Pulling all those plans together, again, working with our specialist was first and foremost, because if we knew we could do that and replicate it from race to race to race, then whenever fans would be allowed to come back, that would be that opportunity to go back and take a look at when we would be able to do that. So that was, again, a lot of planning. And then once we had a plan, we had to map it all out because then it dealt with the state and local officials, the health officials, to see that they would approve these plans. Because again, this is the first time they're seeing it, and they're making a bet for their local communities and everything else that we wouldn't contaminate their areas as well when coming in with the travel and show that we have. And we had to vet that through them several times to get their feedback. We felt Darlington was a good place to start in South Carolina. The reason being it was only a short drive from Charlotte, which is where most of the race teams were where they have their home shops at. They could get down there pretty easily, come in for the day, come out. That was another big challenge. How do we adjust our schedule? We're used to showing up multi-days early, practicing, doing all that. We had to take all that off the table, and it was really what we call a one-day show where people would come in for the race, compete, and go home, and that was it. And when we were able to prove that in Darlington the first time, we repeated at several other locations after that. Building on the confidence and the reputation that we had with the states to be able to position us in at a point where we thought we could ask to have fans. And the first place we really worked hard was here in the state of Florida, working with our governor, Ron DeSantis, and he gave us the green light. It was roughly mid-June to have a small amount of fans out that we could, can test our procedures and our protocols, then apply, what we learned, from the competition side and start to apply that to the fan base too. So it was a journey, it was a lot of unknowns, but I think we guessed pretty well.
Yeah, very interesting. You mentioned something. I was going to ask this question, but you said it yourself. NASCAR has potentially a certain advantage when compared maybe to, I assume, some of the other team sports in North America when it comes to producing the event in a COVID environment, even without fans. Were there any disadvantages that are unique to NASCAR that made it maybe more challenging for certain things? Just the you mentioned the concept of like one day and you're doing this race when typically you'd be preparing for multiple days with people together. That seems really daunting. And then a follow-up question to that, is that going to stick around, do you think, kind of this shortened schedule to get things going faster because we're able to do it more through technology or more virtual? Tell me a little bit about that thought process.
Great questions, Dan. I think I mentioned it briefly, but the volume of people it takes to put on the race is incredibly challenging. And then to race at the same location week after week, like the NBA played basketball in Orlando, that's easy to do. But if you were to race at the same location, it would become pretty boring pretty quick because, it's the diversity of our racetracks, the different, configurations really make racing more interesting. So being able to then mobilize what we did at the first location and repeat it time and time, and then do it within the unique restrictions that might be in place in those local governments and local communities that we're running. And so I think that's where our challenge was. And, you're bringing people from out of town into those communities. Are the teams being safe with their personnel before they get to the next community and doing all the right things to not, potentially contaminate the garage area and all that? It was challenging and it was daunting, but I could tell you the number of people that got infected during that time was incredibly small. I mean, you probably never even heard about it. There was only a couple drivers who got affected the entire season, and that was it. So I think, again, it was really something that I think the industry all rallied around, and everybody worked together collectively on that to say, hey, this was something that, we think that, we can all do if we all pitch in. And it was an amazing experience to be able to, be part of that and see all that come together. And then the second part of your question was what is going to stick around? We announced our schedule for 2021 a couple of weeks ago, and as part of that, we are shortening some of the weekends. The one thing that we did learn out of this, and it was an opportunity to experiment on a lot of different things, is the competition on the track was probably a little bit more exciting when drivers just had to show up without practice and qualifying. Because it was the first time they were in their cars. It was the first time they were under the conditions of the race facility, and then they had to compete right out of the gates and made the racing even more competitive than we've seen in the past. And so our scores on the racing experience and all that went way up, and we were excited about that. Now, some of the bigger events like the Daytona 500 or a championship at Julie's race at the end of the year, we're going to probably have a little bit more discipline in, and we're going to add more of that, the legacy parts of how our sport operated, because it's great content for our fans as well, and we want them to come out and enjoy it. But we have taken a lot of learnings from this year, and I've already said, these are going to be sustainable, and there's something that's going to stick, and we're going to continue with post-COVID.
Very interesting answer. Thank you. Let's fast forward to Julie and the race that just happened not too long ago. And maybe I'll ask this question. Tell me about the relationship with Meshh, and when did that relationship come about? Did it come about pre-COVID, and it just, was another use that you could use it for once you had to try to bring fans back in a COVID environment? I don't remember if I've asked that question, but was the relationship there before COVID?
Yes, actually, we were very fortunate that Craig and supported us going back about 18 months ago. In case you can't tell, I'm not American, and I wasn't that familiar with NASCAR until I had what was a brilliant weekend actually in Bristol. I think was the first race that we did for you last year as a proof of concept. So we had worked with NASCAR on a few different venues, with a view to kind of exploring what we could do together with our core product. And obviously, once COVID came along, we had applied the technology in a couple of different environments before we got to Julie's race. But being the end of the season, the high profile, the big one, it was great for us to be able to support. I mean, we're only one piece of all of the fantastic work that goes into the safe safety and security of the staff, the patrons, of everyone that's involved. So, Julie, I think you use Meshh along with multiple other technologies and stakeholder groups to ensure the safety of everyone involved.
It's a terrific segue. Julie, I'd love to hear, tell us your story. Tell us about the challenges that you faced when you were trying to execute this, and tell us how many fans were actually there. What were the good things that happened, the things you'd like to see done better, and you can talk about the Meshh technology, but of course, as Caroline says, it's not the only solution that you use.
Yeah, definitely. And again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. We crowned 4 champions just over a week ago here at Phoenix Raceway. And as Craig talked about, we had at Phoenix Raceway the ability to learn from all the other tracks that were running races. As NASCAR was returning to racing, we're turning fans to our races. All those protocols that were being put in place, we were able to learn from and adapt to Phoenix Raceway. So we were the last race, like Craig said, that ran with full grandstands. And then we were able to learn from all of our other tracks on what was working and continue to tweak it for Phoenix Raceway. So for us, just like every other track that we have run races at, it's delivering that safe experience was top priority. And the protocols that we had in place were face masks were required and temperature screenings as you entered the gates. New for race fans, coolers weren't permitted for the first time. To continue with the contactless experience was really important to us. So that was a big reason for not bringing coolers in. Race fans are very used to that, being able to bring a cooler in. So that was a big communication piece for us. Social distancing throughout the venue, that was a key piece for us. We had about a 20% capacity in our grandstands, and we did some reserved table seating in our infield. And then Phoenix Raceway is a little bit different. We actually have a mountain outside of turns 1 and 2, the hillside seating. So we actually socially distanced that as well. And overall, the response has been very positive. Our fans were very grateful. I got so many thank yous for having them there. They felt safe. And I think when we talk about the Meshh technology, the social distancing is important for us, but obviously it takes a number of staff to be able to open the property on a regular race day. Now add all the additional protocols, clean teams walking around, the temperature screeners like I talk about, to have the Meshh technology to help us monitor gatherings and make sure that we don't have a density of people in specific areas was really important for us. So there were some very key areas that we had identified going into the race weekend that we wanted to make sure we were monitoring: concession lines, restroom lines, the concourse in general, as well as that infield experience. The infield was new for us on how we were actually going to execute it. So to have that extra technology to help us understand what the movements were, and luckily we didn't see any of that. So it reiterated that all the protocols and procedures that we had put in place did work.
That's excellent to hear. But I also want to talk about the scenario where something went wrong, and that's Caroline. When we prepped last week, we talked about communication. You said the only time that you're going to get communication from Meshh is when someone's not doing something right? And so
I describe it as a bit like insurance.
Yes.
You've got to pay for it, but hopefully you never need to use it. Particularly, the capacity features. Meshh does a lot of other things, by the way, and you do hear about us. We turn up and tell you lots of useful insight and interesting information about how your consumers behaved in your space and how they spent their day. But in the world of COVID, the key one at the moment is understanding. Not so much your capacity. You sell tickets. You define your capacity in a lot of ways. You don't need me to tell you that there's 10,000 people there if you sold 10,000 tickets, right? But what is much more nuanced and much more important is what those people are doing and where they are at moments in time. So what do those choke points look like? What are the behaviors once they're inside? Particularly if your environment is a combination of different buildings, different experiences, if you've got some exterior assets, if you've got multiple different buildings. I've never heard of anybody with a socially distanced mountain before, though, Julie. That is most definitely a first in my book. Congratulations. I'm very glad you didn't ask us to measure that. I've never measured a mountain. I mean, if you want to try next time, but I've never measured a mountain before. But yeah. But once there's 20%, 50%, 10%, whatever that number is, and there's people much smarter than me that need to work out the number, guys. We contribute towards it. We can give you our input and suggestions, but there's cleverer people than me to tell you what the capacity of an environment should be. What we then do is take on the responsibility for identifying where those people are at any given time. So if all 20% are standing in a queue for a bar, you have a problem. If all 20% are behaving in the way that you predict they will or you forecast they will, you've got absolutely no reason to hear from us whatsoever if you're using the density piece, because you won't get alerted. So, if you don't have a problem, you don't hear from us. If you do have a problem, our system is set up to alert whoever you nominate, which is invariably someone in the operations, someone in project management, someone in central control. Those alerts go out to whatever the key stakeholder groups are to then take the appropriate action. Sometimes it's Meshh on site, sometimes it's not, and it's a combination of operations, gate staff, lots of people can get involved, but you sort of need to have a plan if someone does get that information. So being told that somewhere's busy, you then need to have a plan about what you're going to do about that and how you're going to move people on. When does busy become a problem? Is busy for a minute an issue, or is busy for 30 minutes? Okay, we really need to, this is a challenge now. So those kinds of decisions we work with our clients to kind of based on their venue, because no venue is the same, right? No experience is the same, no race is the same, no track is the same, no stadium is the same, no fan is the same. You can predict or forecast as best you can, but I think we would all recognize now that reality then happens, and you never get it right all the time.
Caroline or Garth, are there applications for not just fan movement, but also staff movement? And are you in that space as well, or is it primarily just fan movement through a venue?
We don't differentiate between devices. So what we can do is remove staff from the model, if that's something that you want. And to be honest, under non-COVID related sort of behaviors, people often ask us to remove key staff from understanding how long people are standing in a space for, because if it's a member of staff, of course they're going to be there for 8 hours. If they're not meant to be there for 8 hours, then you've got another problem in your hands, right? So sometimes staff can skew your insights. So but our technology is passive and anonymous. So we don't have personally identifiable information about the individuals, which means we don't differentiate between effectively the devices. We use devices as a proxy for people. We can apply behaviors. So we can say that device has been here for 4 hours, so we can make an assumption that it's a member of staff and then subsequently remove it from your pool of information. And we work with our clients again to define whether that's relevant or pertinent for events or experiences or whatever their needs are.
Interesting. Are there different variables and approaches to a different design for a stadium, whether it's an open air stadium, whether it's or an arena rather, whether it's a closed arena? How do you approach that?
So I'm gonna hand over to Garth, because he is the king of the festival.
All right.
Garth is very used to a fan zone and a festival, and deploying Meshh in the great outdoors, which is one of our unique offerings.
Yeah. So to answer your question, Dan, there are, I guess, a bit of nuances between indoor and outdoor. I wouldn't say that's probably the most predominant factor that we think about whenever we're deploying. I think the beauty of this technology is that it works in a variety of different environments. So indoor, outdoor, in stadiums, festivals, fan zones, brand activations, and supermarkets. It can kind of it can really work anywhere. And so one of the to be honest with you, with the Phoenix race, we turned it around pretty quickly, and I think that speaks to how flexible our technology is. They came to us, a couple weeks prior to the race, saying they wanted to reproduce something similar to what we did with the team at Daytona. And we were able to, sit down and look at a CAD map and talk about, where we thought the potential choke points were, where we thought people would be crowding, where the likelihood that, those social distance guidelines may, come into question. So we were able to map something out. I think we used about 25 sensors at Phoenix, and it was really, really easy to do with the help of the Phoenix team. So, props to Julie's entire team on that front, and her operations staff. They made it really easy for us to plan it out. But to answer your question, it is really flexible, and there are always certain kind of nuances to consider in different environments. But I think we handle pretty much any situation, really well. We have a lot of smart people on our team that kind of help dial that stuff in. So.
We also share some benchmarks with our clients. So we have a lot of sort of data and experience over the years that we can homogenize, so we can provide insight into how a festival behaves differently from a motorsport event, behaves differently from a supermarket activation. So we have some white label benchmarking information to help people put the information in context, because all of these tools and all data and all analytics products and all technology are as good as the thinking that goes into the deployment, and it's as good as the interpretation of the information that you get back out of it. So I'm a bit of a believer that sometimes what you don't measure is as important as what you do. Like, you need to set out with a plan as to what it is that you want to learn, and focus on the things that will make a difference and the things that you're in a position to act on, because you can get yourself very caught up in spreadsheets and not necessarily doing a couple of things well and making a meaningful difference. So we try and work with our clients to identify what's the couple of pieces of information that, if I'm able to share those with you after your event, will make your job easier, will make it better next time, will help your fans, will help your end consumers. And if we pick up other stuff as a byproduct, that's great too. But so long as I can deliver on those kinds of things, then that's what we focus on a lot, is measuring what matters, really, rather than measuring everything.
Yeah. I've this isn't our safety and security track, but I have a question along those lines. I'm curious if you can recognize certain movements from, maybe individual fans or one or two fans that might look like there might be some hostility, whether it's a fight that you want to make sure that you take care of and take people out, or whether it's odd movements from someone that might relate to a security threat. Is there an application for that?
We don't, because of GDPR compliance, we don't track down onto an individual level. So we are not the right technology. I don't believe anyone with a Wi-Fi analytics product that is the right technology to be able to support that. I think, to be fair, maybe something visual, maybe something camera might be a better solution for that particular use case.
Fair enough.
I'd love to claim it, but we're good, but we're not that good.
Fair enough. Understood. Well, let's talk. We have a couple minutes here, and so I want to talk about what's next and what's going to stick around. And it's a question that I asked folks on our earlier panel. And certainly I want to hear kind of Meshh what you've learned from this process over the last 7-8 months, in a time where I'm thinking that your services are in demand higher than ever. What have you learned, and what lessons are you going to take forward into next year? And why don't I start maybe with our folks at NASCAR and Phoenix Raceway, and it doesn't have to be Meshh necessarily. I think Caroline would be okay with that. But Craig, just overarching learning that you have from the 8 months or so that we've been in this, and what's going to stick around next year.
Yeah, I think, being more specific around technology, I think the whole world of contactless is not going to go away. I think that's going to become just a norm for everything we do. So, from, access through digital means, your digital tickets, certainly cashless payments are going to be big, ordering off of your mobile devices, all those things I think are now just, we always wanted to get to that point, but this certainly accelerated the speed of which we got there. and it's going to be around for us for a while. So those are, when I think about technology, those are the ones that we're looking at further investments on and what else we could do. And I'll let Julie talk about, from an operations standpoint, everything that we learned from this year and what her views are on going forward.
Go ahead, Julie. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, I think it's, Craig, I think you summed it up nicely for us. We had a very big move to cashless, and really that was a change in behavior for our race fans, and they adapted incredibly well. Honestly, I think we were a little surprised at how much of a shift we saw in this first event, moving towards that. So I think everything that Craig talked about is what we're going to continue to do here at Phoenix Raceway. Key learnings. I mean, there was just so much, and that we learned. We actually had a staff meeting this morning, going through the event weekend, and it was all new to us. I mean, we've hosted how many events here at Phoenix Raceway, but the recap and the download was just completely different because we had never hosted an event in this environment with these protocols and procedures. So for us, just continuing to provide that safe experience is number one. And I think you'll see a lot of the technology continue to move forward, and a lot of it that you don't see behind the scenes either, like the Meshh technology that we're using as operators, that our fans don't always see, but it's all part of making that safe experience for them.
Garth and Caroline, I'll give you the last word. Go ahead.
Caroline.
Garth, I always get the last word. What have we learned this year? I think that for me, it's been a really interesting experience leading a business that focuses on the movement of people when for a lot of the year there was no people moving. So it has taught me to focus on what we're good at, and to be resolute in terms of understanding what gaps that we can fill for our clients and how we can help them. Acknowledge that we are one piece of a much more complex picture, and that on balance, none of us are splitting the atom here, right? The most important thing is that people are healthy and well, and that we'll all desperately want to get back to having human relationships and societal contact. And I'm incredibly jealous that I'm locked in London again, and I didn't get to any NASCAR races this year, and I haven't been to any festivals and concerts, and I miss it terribly. And I think it's really important that everybody does everything that they can to ensure the safety of venues so that we can professionally but also personally re-engage as people. So hold firm, it'll all work out okay. It's been 9 months. The first 6 were pretty grim. The last 3 have been a roller coaster and great fun. So, we'll see where we go. I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm in a strange way slightly terrified and slightly excited.
Well, I think we got to end on that one, Caroline. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Julie, Garth, Craig, and Caroline. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to Meshh for the support. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.